Humanity had long gazed at the stars with wonder, but what they encountered that day was unlike anything they had ever dreamed of. In the year 2127, the breakthrough came not from the exploration of distant worlds, but from the void itself. A signal, a message from somewhere far beyond the reaches of their greatest telescopes. It wasn't a static, random collection of data. No, this was a carefully structured series of pulses, patterns that were too intricate to be the result of natural phenomena. The signal, though weak and faint, was clearly artificial. The discovery came through Earth's most advanced deep space observatory, a vast array of sensors stationed on the outer edges of the Oort cloud. The signal was unlike anything humanity had ever detected before, something that spoke of intelligence, something that had been waiting to be heard for far longer than humanity had existed. At first, the scientists thought it was just noise, a random burst of radiation. But as more time passed, the signal's consistency became impossible to ignore. Every few hours, it would repeat, with slight variations in frequency, as if someone, somewhere, was trying to reach out. The world's most brilliant minds were called in to decipher the pattern, but the codes were complex, unyielding. Some thought it was a message of peace, others warned it might be a trap. Within weeks, governments around the globe shifted focus to the signal. The United Nations convened an emergency summit to decide what action to take. The discovery could either be the key to unlocking humanity's future or a threat that could bring it all to ruin. What if this was an alien civilization? What if their intentions were hostile? Amid the political turbulence and rising anxiety, Dr. Alice Munro, a leading astrobiologist, was chosen to lead a team of specialists. A seasoned astronaut and scientist, Dr. Munro had spent years studying the possibility of extraterrestrial life. She understood the risks of venturing into the unknown, but her curiosity and drive outweighed any hesitation. If this was a message from an alien race, she wanted to be the one to answer. The team worked day and night, poring over the data. Finally, after weeks of effort, a breakthrough came. It wasn't just a signal, it was an invitation. Hidden in the deep layers of the transmission, encrypted within seemingly random frequencies, was a set of coordinates. They pointed to a star system located 12 light-years away, a region of space that had been previously unexplored by human eyes. A specific planet within the system seemed to be the source. The message was unmistakable. Come, we awake you. Excitement surged through the scientific community. But with it came fear. What kind of civilization would send such a message? What kind of beings would reach out to humanity? And why now? Some believed it was an opportunity for peaceful contact, but others feared it might be a trap. But the most pressing question remained. What would they find when they arrived? The world united under one banner, an unprecedented collaboration between countries, agencies, and corporations. Plans were set in motion to send a crew beyond the confines of Earth's solar system. A newly constructed starship, the Eclipse, was chosen for the mission, designed with the most advanced technology humanity had ever developed. The crew would consist of the best and brightest minds, all ready to take the greatest leap of their lives. Dr. Munro was to be the commander, leading a crew that would travel farther than any human before. And so, as humanity prepared to journey into the unknown, one thing was certain. They were no longer alone in the universe, but the mystery remained. Who or what awaited them? The Eclipse was a marvel of human engineering, its sleek design optimized for long-distance travel. Capable of reaching speeds that had once been the stuff of science fiction, it was the first ship built to venture far beyond the known limits of the solar system. The crew, handpicked from the brightest minds on Earth, was a mixture of astronauts, engineers, scientists, and military personnel, all united by a common purpose: to answer the signal from the stars. As the ship launched from Earth's orbit, the crew marveled at the sheer enormity of the task ahead. Outside the viewports, the stars stretched endlessly, and the black void of space seemed to swallow them whole. For the first few days, everything went smoothly. The crew settled into the routine of their journey, eating, sleeping, working. But the silence of deep space was oppressive. Days blurred into nights, and the vast emptiness outside their ship became all-encompassing. Then, on the 10th day, something happened. It was subtle at first, a slight flicker in the power grid, followed by an unsettling hum in the ship's core systems. The sensors, which had been reporting the standard fluctuations of space travel, began to show odd readings. Gravitational anomalies, low-frequency energy surges, an unexplained increase in radiation levels. "Run another diagnostic," Captain Monroe ordered, her voice calm, but her brow furrowed. She knew something wasn't right. The ship's AI confirmed that all systems were operating within acceptable parameters, but Monroe's instincts told her otherwise. Hours later, the anomalies became more pronounced. The flickers turned into constant disruptions. The ship's navigation system began to behave erratically, as though something was pulling at it, guiding it in a direction it had not programmed for. The crew was baffled. The calculations for the journey had been perfect, yet now they were being led off course, drifting away from their intended path. "Are we being followed?" Lieutenant Jackson, the communications officer, asked uneasily, staring at the sensor readings. "It's like something's out there, tracking us." Dr. Mia Lennox, the ship's lead scientist, tapped into the ship's deep space radar. Her face paled as the scans revealed a vast, invisible presence just ahead. It wasn't a ship, at least not one they could identify. It was a field of energy, huge, almost incomprehensible, stretching out far beyond their sensors' reach. She quickly ran simulations, but the readings didn't add up. The energy signatures were unlike anything recorded in known space. "I don't think we're alone," Dr. Lennox said softly, as the crew gathered around the station. The hair on the back of Captain Monroe's neck stood on end. She felt it, an unsettling presence, not just in the data, but in the air. Something, or someone, was watching them. As they ventured further into this strange, unseen domain, the ship's systems continued to malfunction. The crew began to notice strange fluctuations in the ship's atmosphere, like static in the air, tingling on their skin. Some members began to experience vivid, surreal dreams during sleep, dreams of distant landscapes and unknown faces, some of which were too real to be mere hallucinations. Captain Monroe kept a tight grip on the crew's nerves, but even she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pulled deeper into the unknown. It was as if they had crossed an invisible threshold, into something vast, ancient, and unfathomable. Their mission, which had once seemed like an exciting adventure, now felt like a journey into the abyss. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, a sudden jolt rocked the ship, sharp, like a blow from a giant fist. The entire crew was thrown off balance. Systems went dark for a moment, and alarms blared. The ship lurched again, and this time there was no mistaking it. They were not alone. Something had just made itself known. Something enormous and powerful, hidden until now, had revealed its presence. The Eclipse was no longer in control of its own course. It was being pulled toward something, and there was no turning back. The ship drifted in silence as the crew gazed out at the alien landscape unfolding before them. The unknown presence that had been tugging at the Eclipse had finally released its grip, but not before guiding them to a world unlike any they had ever seen. The planet they now orbited was barren, its surface a muted gray, devoid of the lush greens or the blue oceans humanity was accustomed to. Yet something about the planet's stark desolation felt intentional, as though it had been shaped for a purpose long forgotten. "We're here," Captain Monroe said quietly, her voice strained as she stared at the planet below. "This is it, the source of the signal." Dr. Lennox was already running diagnostic scans, her fingers dancing over the control panels. Her eyes widened as the data poured in. "There's no sign of life, no detectable atmosphere to speak of. But there's something beneath the surface. A structure. It's massive, much larger than anything we've ever seen." With a soft hiss, the landing gear of the Eclipse lowered. the massive craft beginning its descent into the alien world. The crew felt the subtle thrum of the ship's engines as it cut through the planet's thin, inhospitable atmosphere. As they neared the surface, the sensors began picking up more details, a vast, symmetrical grid of angular structures, stone-like in texture, arranged with the precision of a city long abandoned. The city below was silent, its jagged towers and winding streets casting long shadows in the dim light of the distant star. From their view, the city looked as though it had been frozen in time, untouched by the ravages of nature. The architecture was alien, unlike anything Earth had ever produced. Vast, grandiose, yet strangely intimate in its design. The way the buildings were aligned, the contours of the stone, spoke of a civilization that had understood something about the universe that humanity could barely begin to comprehend. The ship's landing gear touched down with a soft thud, and the crew prepared to disembark. As they exited the craft, the planet's surface greeted them with a cold, metallic scent. The wind was eerily absent, and even the most basic sounds, the crunch of boots on the dust, the soft hum of the ship's systems, seemed muffled, as though the very air held its breath. "This place feels wrong," Lieutenant Jackson muttered, his voice barely audible, as he scanned the surroundings. "I don't know how to explain it. Like we're not supposed to be here." The rest of the crew shared his unease. Despite the city's imposing grandeur, it exuded an emptiness that was impossible to ignore. The streets were clean, almost too clean, as though swept by invisible hands. There were no signs of life. No animals, no plants, not even the usual telltale signs of human habitation. And yet, it was clear that this city had been built for something or someone. As they ventured deeper into the city, the crew discovered that some of the structures had once been immense halls, now hollow and crumbling. The technology embedded within the city's walls was unmistakable in its sophistication. The walls themselves seemed to shimmer, as if alive, reacting to the presence of the crew. Dr. Lennox approached one of the larger structures, her fingers brushing against the surface. The stone-like material was warm to the touch, and as she made contact, intricate designs began to glow faintly in the dim light. "These patterns, they're not random," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This city, it's alive, somehow. It's responding to us." At that moment, the crew's instruments began to pick up an unusual energy pulse coming from deep within the city, a powerful signal, one that echoed the same patterns they had detected from space. Only this time, the signal was stronger, more direct. They were close now, closer to the source of the message. But as the crew advanced toward the heart of the city, the unsettling feeling that something was watching them grew stronger. There was no sound, no movement, yet the air felt thick with anticipation, as if the city itself held its breath. Without warning, the signal intensified, flooding the crew's minds with a single word, repeated over and over, reverberating through their consciousness. "Awaken." The city seemed to pulse with the word, as if urging them forward. But what would they awaken, and at what cost? The crew was about to find out. As the crew ventured deeper into the heart of the ancient city, the air grew heavier, the very atmosphere thick with a strange, oppressive energy. The walls of the grand structures seemed to hum with life, and the intricate patterns that had once been static now shifted and moved as though alive. Dr. Lennox's eyes gleamed with excitement and trepidation as she studied the patterns on the walls. The designs were not random. They were part of something much larger, a language or code, one that was slowly unlocking as they moved closer to the center of the city. "This isn't just a city," Dr. Lennox whispered, her voice hushed. "It's a repository of knowledge, technology, perhaps even consciousness itself. I think we're standing on the precipice of something ancient." Captain Monroe didn't respond immediately. Her mind was focused on the pulsing signal that was now emanating from the center of the city, its frequency rising in intensity. Every step they took brought them closer to the source, but as they drew near, a sense of dread crept over them. The city, despite its silence, was watching them, waiting for something. When they reached the largest structure, a massive temple-like edifice that towered above the rest, the signal flared with an almost overwhelming intensity. The doors, which had once been sealed for millennia, began to open with a slow, reverberating groan. The crew stepped forward, each one feeling a deep, primal pull toward what lay beyond. Inside, the chamber was vast, more massive than anything the crew had ever encountered. At the center stood a pedestal, a single alien artifact resting upon it. The artifact was unlike anything they had ever seen, its surface shimmering with a strange iridescent glow, as though it were made of something between light and matter, a living thing that defied conventional understanding. The crew stood in awe, their breaths caught in their throats. And then, as if triggered by their presence, the artifact began to pulse. The hum of the city around them intensified, filling the chamber with an alien resonance that seemed to reverberate in the very bones of the crew members. The air grew colder and the shadows deepened, swirling with an unsettling energy. A voice, deep, ancient, and resonating with power, suddenly filled their minds, flooding their thoughts with words not spoken aloud. It was not a language the crew understood, yet somehow the meaning came through clearly, as though it were being translated directly into their consciousness. "I am Destiny," the voice intoned. "I have awaited your arrival. You are the ones who will inherit the legacy of the Eel Theory." The name struck a chord deep within the crew. The Eel Theory, the ancient civilization whose ruins they had uncovered. The voice continued, its tone both soothing and commanding, as though speaking from the depths of eternity. The Eel Theory were the architects of this galaxy. They built, they conquered, they learned. But their enemies were many, and their downfall was inevitable. You, the children of Earth, have been chosen to carry their flame into the future, to wield their power, to rebuild what was lost. But know this, some knowledge is dangerous, and some power, when misused, can destroy entire worlds. The voice paused, as if weighing its next words carefully. Your arrival is not a coincidence. You have been guided here for a reason. You are the inheritors of a destiny that spans the ages. But you must understand, what you awaken now will shape the fate of all that is to come. Captain Monroe's heart raced as the weight of the voice's words settled in. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had come seeking answers, but this was something more, something vast, unfathomable. The artifact on the pedestal glowed brighter, its pulsing intensifying as Destiny's presence seemed to envelop the room. The very air felt charged with power, as if the entire city was alive, waiting for something to happen. "Do you accept the responsibility of this power?" Destiny's voice asked, reverberating in their minds. "Do you accept the legacy of the Eel Theory?" Captain Monroe's mind raced. The path ahead seemed clear, but so did the dangers. They were standing at the crossroads of human history, on the threshold of a power that could shape the galaxy, for better or worse. But before she could speak, a warning flashed across the ship's systems, a cryptic message from the outside. The signal had been detected, and it was not alone. The enemy was coming. The silence in the chamber shattered as the warning blared through the ship's communication systems. A surge of static crackled over the speakers before Lieutenant Jackson's voice broke through the chaos, filled with urgency. "Captain, we've got company. Multiple unidentified ships. They're fast, too fast, and they're closing in on our position. They'd got a direct lock on us." Monroe's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected something was wrong, but she hadn't anticipated the situation escalating so quickly. The crew had just uncovered the power of the Eel Theory, and now they were about to face a threat unlike any they had encountered before. "What kind of ships?" Monroe demanded, her eyes scanning the darkened landscape of the alien city beyond the chamber. "They're not human. They're nothing like we've seen before," Jackson replied, voice tight. "They're emitting energy signatures similar to what we're detecting here, only on a much larger scale. It's like they're harnessing the same technology we just uncovered. The realization hit Monroe like a thunderclap. The enemy wasn't just aware of their presence. They had been waiting for them. All this time, the signal had been a lure, pulling them into a hidden conflict that spanned millennia. The Eolthuri were not simply a lost civilization. They were the remnants of a war that had been hidden from the universe, waiting for someone to pick up the pieces. Who are they? Dr. Lennox muttered, her face pale as she stared at the display. The truth was beginning to unfold, but it only made the situation more complex. Unknown, Jackson replied grimly. But I think I know where they're coming from. They're in orbit around the other side of the planet. It's not just ships. There's something more, a massive fleet, hidden from view until now. It's as if the whole war is unfolding right under our noses. Monroe's eyes narrowed. The city, with its strange silence and mystery, had been a trap, a place to awaken the power of the Eolthuri, a power that had been forgotten and buried for a reason. But now, that power was attracting attention from forces who had clearly been watching the human race for some time. And they were not about to let humanity claim it. We need to get back to the eclipse. Now, Monroe ordered, voice steady despite the dread clawing at her insides. Lennox, can we shut down the artifact? Is there a way to stop the signal? Dr. Lennox moved quickly, examining the glowing device on the pedestal. The pulsing glow had intensified since the warning had sounded. The artifact seemed to be feeding off the energy of the incoming ships, reacting to the imminent threat. She worked rapidly, her fingers flying across the interface as she tried to disengage it. I can try, she said, though her voice was filled with uncertainty. But if these ships are using the same energy, disconnecting it might trigger something we don't fully understand. We could make things worse. We don't have a choice, Monroe said firmly. We need to leave now. Shut it down if you can. The team hurried toward the exit, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the hollow streets of the city. Their senses were heightened, each creak and groan of the ancient buildings sounding louder in the tense atmosphere. The sky above had darkened with the approaching threat, and the eclipse sat just on the horizon, waiting for them. As they neared the landing site, another shudder passed through the ground beneath their feet, more violent this time. It felt as though the entire planet was trembling, reacting to the foreign presence now on its surface. The hum from the artifact seemed to resonate in the air, sending waves of discomfort through their bodies. Something was about to happen, a shift they couldn't fully comprehend. We're not going to make it back to the ship in time, Jackson said urgently, as he glanced at the sky. Blackened ships emerged from the planet's far side, cutting through the atmosphere with speed and precision. They're coming down. Monroe's instincts kicked in, and she broke into a sprint. We need to get to the eclipse. Fast. Everyone. Move. They raced toward the ship, but the ground beneath them continued to shake as the enemy ships descended. With each passing moment, the threat grew more real, and the weight of their discovery began to settle on them. This wasn't just a first contact. This was the beginning of a war that had been hidden from humanity, fought in the shadows for centuries. And now, they were in the middle of it. The conflict that had started with a single signal had exploded into something far greater, something that would shape the fate of all life in the galaxy. But what side would humanity take in the coming war? Would they fight for control of the Eolthuri legacy, or would they become pawns in a game far older and more dangerous than they could ever imagine? The ground beneath their feet rumbled once more, the vibrations now unmistakable. The enemy ships were descending fast, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like harbingers of destruction. Captain Monroe's heart pounded as she led the crew toward the eclipse, but there was no escaping the truth. They were not going to make it in time. The ships were too fast, and they were already closing in. Move faster, Monroe barked, her voice sharp as she pushed the crew to run faster. They had to reach the ship and take off, quickly. The eclipse was their only chance, but it was already too late. Without warning, a thunderous explosion rocked the ground behind them. sending a shockwave of dust and debris into the air. The force of the blast sent the crew sprawling, knocking them off their feet. Captain Monroe gasped as the shockwave slammed into her, and she struggled to regain her balance. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she heard the familiar sounds of alarms blaring from the ship's communication system. "Damage report," Monroe shouted as she rose to her feet, trying to shake off the ringing in her ears. "We've been hit." Jackson's voice crackled through her earpiece, full of panic. "They're firing on us. The Eclipse is taking direct hits." Monroe's stomach churned. The ship was still a few hundred meters away, and there was no cover between them and the looming threat. The enemy ships, sleek and black, hovered menacingly in the air above them, weapons primed. They had no intention of letting the humans leave the planet alive. "Lennox, Jackson, can you get the ship's shields online? We need to protect the Eclipse from those blasts." "We're trying, Captain, but they're jamming our systems." Jackson's voice responded, frustration and fear creeping in. "I can't get through the interference." The crew quickly scrambled to take cover behind a nearby ruin, hearts pounding, eyes flicking up toward the sky where the enemy ships hovered. The ships were massive, dwarfing the Eclipse in size. Their hulls seemed to ripple with energy, the same kind of energy that the artifact had emitted. It was as though they were drawn to the power the humans had just unearthed, an ancient force that they could not yet fully comprehend. Another blast sent a plume of dust into the air, closer this time. Monroe could see the Eclipse, her ship, taking the hits, the hull shuddering with each impact. The gleaming exterior was beginning to buckle under the barrage. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. "We have to stop them," Lieutenant Jackson shouted, his voice crackling through the comms. "Captain, we can't just hide here. We need to fight back." Monroe's mind raced. She knew the stakes. If they didn't take the enemy ships down, there wouldn't be an Eclipse to escape in. But they were outmatched. The enemy had the upper hand. "All units, prepare to engage," Monroe ordered, her voice filled with authority. "Lennox, can you access the ship's weapons systems remotely? We need firepower. Now." "I can try," Dr. Lennox replied, her voice steady but tight with tension. "I might be able to access a few of the lower-level systems, but we'll have to rely on the ship's main defenses to deal with those ships. It's the only chance we have." Without wasting another moment, Monroe grabbed the nearest comms device and issued a new order. "Get everyone to the ship. We're taking off, shields or no shields. We can't waste time." The crew rallied together, making a desperate dash for the Eclipse. Every second felt like an eternity as the enemy ships continued to target the ship with relentless precision. But the crew pushed forward, driven by one thought: survival. The Eclipse's engines roared to life as the crew boarded the ship and scrambled to their stations. It was a tense moment, a calm before the storm. Monroe took her seat at the helm, gripping the controls as she waited for Lennox's confirmation that the ship's shields were operational. "We've got power to the shields," Lennox announced, "but just enough to get us off the ground." The Eclipse lifted off, the powerful engines straining against the gravity of the planet. But before they could ascend into the safety of space, another explosion rocked the ship, throwing the crew off balance. The hull shuddered, and Monroe's teeth clenched as she fought to keep the ship steady. The enemy ships were not giving up. They were relentless in their assault, hammering the Eclipse with blast after blast. Monroe's hands flew over the controls, trying to break free of their grasp, but the incoming fire was too intense. "This is it," Jackson whispered. "We're not going to make it, Captain. We're sitting ducks out here." But Monroe refused to give up. Not yet. She slammed the throttle forward, pushing the Eclipse into a sharp, evasive roll. It wasn't enough to shake the enemy ships off, but it bought them just a little time. And that was all she needed. With one last, desperate move, Monroe aimed the ship toward the stars. hoping that somehow they could escape the wrath of those who had been waiting for them to awaken the ancient power of the Eolthuri. But as the eclipse shot into the sky, something deep within the ship's systems began to flicker, like a dormant force waking up, responding to the chaos. Monroe had no idea what it was, but she could feel it. Something was changing. The war was just beginning. The eclipse shot through the atmosphere with an intensity that rattled the crew's bones. The ship's engines screamed as it broke free of the planet's gravity well, narrowly avoiding another barrage from the enemy ships below. Captain Monroe's hands were white-knuckled on the controls, her eyes locked on the viewport as the hostile vessels grew smaller beneath them. But even as they pulled away, she could feel the tension in the air. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "We're clear of the planet's atmosphere, Captain," Jackson reported, his voice tight. "But those ships aren't giving up. They're in pursuit." Monroe nodded, her mind already racing. The enemy ships were fast, too fast for the eclipse to outrun. If they didn't do something soon, they'd be sitting targets. But there was more to worry about than just the immediate threat. The power of the Eolthuri artifact was still stirring, a deep hum reverberating through the ship, and Monroe could sense that something much bigger was about to unfold. Dr. Lennox's voice broke through her thoughts. "Captain, you need to see this." Monroe turned to see Lennox at the ship's control panel, her face lit by the glow of multiple monitors. The scientist's fingers flew over the holographic interface, her brow furrowed in. The eclipse drifted silently through the void of space, the crew's collective breath held in the aftermath of the battle. The enemy ships, once closing in with deadly precision, were now nothing more than distant specks, scattered and retreating into the darkness. The ship's systems were battered, its hull scarred by the energy exchange. But it still held together. For now. Captain Monroe sat in the command chair, her eyes fixed on the vast emptiness outside the viewport. She was numb, her thoughts a blur of fragments. They had survived, barely, but the price of that survival was yet to be understood. The power they had unleashed was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. It was a force from a forgotten past, a power that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Lennox's voice broke through the silence. "Captain, we need to talk about what just happened." Monroe turned to face her. The scientist was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the readings on the console. The artifact's energy was still rippling through the ship's systems, its pulses slowing but never quite fading. It was as if the ship had become a conduit for something ancient and vast. "We've tapped into something, Captain, and I'm not sure we can control it." Lennox's voice was low, heavy with the weight of the unknown. "The energy we unleashed wasn't just enough to fend off those ships. It's something bigger, something that could change everything." Monroe frowned. "What are you saying?" "We've already made our choice. There's no going back." Lennox hesitated, her gaze flicking between the readouts and Monroe's unyielding expression. "I'm saying that we've just awakened an entire network of power. The artifact, the ships, it's all connected. And I don't think it's just the enemy we have to worry about now. There are others too, forces that may be watching, forces that have been waiting for someone to unlock this power." Monroe processed the words, a cold chill creeping down her spine. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The Eolthuri legacy, their ancient war, wasn't confined to the fragments of their destroyed civilization. It was alive, and it was stirring, reaching out to those who had the power to wield it. And now, humanity had that power. The ship's comms crackled to life. "Captain, we've received a message," Jackson's voice said. "It's coming from deep space. We've never seen anything like it." Monroe turned sharply. "Put it through." The screen flickered to life, showing an image of a figure, a being that seemed almost otherworldly, its form shimmering as though it were not fully present in their dimension. Its voice echoed through the speakers, smooth and unnervingly calm. "Humanity," the being intoned. "You have taken the first step. The power you have awakened is not yours alone to command. You stand at the threshold of a new era, An era where your species will either ascend or fall into darkness. The choice is yours. The transmission cut off as abruptly as it had started, leaving the crew in stunned silence. What was that? Lennox asked, her voice shaky with both awe and fear. Monroe's eyes narrowed. It was a warning. A challenge. We've been pulled into a game that we don't fully understand. A long silence filled the room as the weight of their situation settled in. The enemy ships were still out there, and the strange being who had spoken to them was a reminder that there were forces far beyond human comprehension observing their every move. Jackson, who had been monitoring the ship's sensors, turned back to face Monroe. "Captain, we're not alone. There are more ships, hundreds of them, on their way. But they're not like anything we've seen before. They're ancient, just like the artifact. And they're coming for us." Monroe stood, her mind racing. They had awakened a power far older than humanity, a force that could either destroy them or elevate them beyond anything they had ever imagined. But one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer just a bystander in the galaxy's vast history. They had become players in a cosmic game, one that could reshape the future of the entire universe. "We have no choice but to fight," Monroe said, her voice steady with resolve. "We've crossed the point of no return. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." As the crew prepared for what lay ahead, the first rays of dawn illuminated the distant stars outside the viewport. The universe, vast and unknown, stretched out before them, an endless horizon of possibilities. Humanity's first contact with destiny had set in motion a new era, one where survival would not be guaranteed, but where the power to shape the future rested in the hands of those brave enough to wield it. The war had begun, and the fate of humanity, of the galaxy, was in motion. The dawn of a new era had arrived, and with it, the challenges and wonders that would define the future.